McDonald had a farm, but did he really? If agriculture back then was anything like it is now, government programs enforcing production control, supply management, federal subsidies, with threats of discontinued monetary assistance if he failed to comply, he may have just been a little tiny tractor in the hands of a very big Uncle Sam. Fortunately, old McDonald's not here today, but many other farmers are. For them, their relationship with the government is like having a super annoying and sort of tyrannical backseat driver that threatens to kick them out if they refuse their every whim and usually terrible driving advice, while taking a road trip on the Alaskan highway. So, did Congress ever try to ameliorate this perilous condition?
Actually, I'm glad you asked. In 1996, Congress passed a radical measure, the Federal Agriculture Improvement and Reform Act of 1996, to address this issue. Although the intentions of the bill were to reinforce market-oriented policies and reduce government interference, both seen as positive measures, the implementation of the bill failed to achieve its goals, actually hurting countless farms across the U.S., including the approximately 78,000 farms found here in our home state of Wisconsin. This is a story of how this legislation impacted our farming communities here in Wisconsin and similar communities across the United States.
As our history teachers used to say, we must first understand the past before we understand the present. Well, they were right after all. It all began in the Great Depression when Roosevelt began passing farm legislation to help failing farmers, beginning with the Agricultural Adjustment Act of 1933. Although intended as just a quick fix to help farmers get out of the Dust Bowl predicament, government control only snowballed as time went on, eventually culminating in a standard to write farm bills every 5 years.
Soon, the government was creating a multitude of insurance programs, subsidies, market regulations, and emergency relief programs, all in the name of protecting the farmer.
The upside is the farmer is trading a little bit of his freedom to make decisions on his farm in return for less risk and less exposure to free market forces, always having Uncle Sam at his back ready to catch him if he starts falling backwards.
Unfortunately, the Farm Bill's budget soon reached millions and then billions of dollars, all at the taxpayer's expense. And yes, that's a lot of moolah. Critics claimed that the extreme government regulation of the agricultural industry was distorting the free enterprise system and artificially influencing prices. With this disastrous scene, the pressure to reform finally prompted the passage of the radical 1996 Farm Bill.
And in 1996, they call it the FAIR Act. It got nicknamed the Freedom to Farm Bill, where people, they no longer had to set aside some land in order to get a payment. The payment they got was much smaller, but they could produce as much as they wanted.
This new farm bill is, Uncle Sam's taking a pretty good step backwards away from the farmer and won't be as close to him. Those supports that the farmer has grown accustomed to having will be less. They'll kick in a lot later than they used to should there be a drop in commodity prices, and he'll have to get used to the chilly winds of the free market.
Many welcomed the new legislation and the freedom it brought with it. Farmers can now be in more control of what they planted and what land they used. It was seen as a long overdue measure to reverse old policies dating back to the Depression.
It was like having that super annoying backseat driver with you on the Alaskan highway decide that, yeah, maybe he wasn't paid after all, and he got out of the car. Yeah. Everything was rainbows and unicorns, and then... All of a sudden, the market took a downturn. With the United States government no longer telling the farmers what to plant, the United States farmers actually overproduced. This, as well as favorable weather conditions worldwide, led to plummeting crop prices.
And there was no safety net. So it was like, here you go, you've got all the freedom, which is great, but there wasn't anything underneath to meet those goals that we have as a society to keep our agriculture stable.
The farmers immediately fell into trouble as the 1996 Farm Bill left them with no financial fallback. All of these negative consequences directly affected agricultural communities across the United States, leading many farmers to dub it the Freedom to Fail Act.
I can tell you that when I was your age in high school, hogs were selling for $60 for every 100 pounds, just to give you an idea. That was in the middle 70s. In the middle 90s, after this legislation went through and everybody could do whatever they wanted and the whole economy goofed up. Hogs were selling in the Mount Horeb area for $5 for 100 pounds. Well, there's just no way anybody can even pay to have that animal marketed, put it on a truck. And that's how dysfunctional it was.
With the farmers in such trouble, the government stepped in to solve the problem it caused in the first place.
Tens of thousands of farmers would have gone broke if the government didn't do something. And what they did was called ad hoc legislation. They just added things to the legislation after the fact that basically was just big checks worth of money. In fact, in 1998 and 99 were huge years. Over $10 billion was written in ad hoc legislation. And in the year 2000, it was $28 billion.
These emergency payments skyrocketed government spending, actually costing the government more money than any of the previous farm bills, even though one of the bill's goals was to cut back.
Yes, and because of the 1996 Farm Bill's failure, the 2002 Farm Bill actually overruled much of its legislation.
So, in a way, policies affecting agricultural communities were right back where they started, with only deleterious effects on farmers and government to show for it.
So, McDonald, it looks like Uncle Sam is not yet done interfering with your and America's farms, as there are still more farm bills to be written. However, after seeing the effects of this farm bill in Wisconsin and other states, it'll be much easier to devise more practical and successful legislation. What better way to use our past and to turn it into our guide for the future?
Sounds pretty moot-tastic to me.
Yes, we've got a barnyard of opportunity awaiting our agricultural communities.
Old MacDonald had a farm, E-I-E-I-O. And on that farm he had some cows, E-I-E-I-O. With a moon